What's going on, guys? It's Char here, bringing you guys a different type of video. Now today we're going all about team building exercise. We're going to be doing a deep dive, telling you guys about this card, why you run the card, and some specific heroes that I think it's really good for, and some criteria to build with the card in general. If this is a video, if you've been wondering about this card, how to make it work best, or anything of that sort, this is the video for you. Go ahead and tune into it and go through the chapters below if there's only a specific section you want to see, but let's get into it. So we're going to begin here talking about the anatomy of the card very briefly. Now, Team Building Exercise is a card that has debuted in 3 packs in the game thus far, which was Ant-Man, then it was Spider-Ham, and then it was Iceman. So those are the 3 packs that this card has come in, which means there's 9 copies if you have the whole collection. But let's get into the card anatomy real quick. So it's a 2-cost basic support, which means you can play it in any deck because it's not tied to an aspect. And it is, if we're going to read the card out, it says hero action, exhaust team building exercise. So you get it once per round, basically. Play a card from your hand that shares a trait with your hero by reducing its resource cost by 1. So there's a couple of considerations here. It is hero side only because it is a hero action, not just an action. Also, it cannot stack because it says you have to play the card when you activate team building exercise. It's not like a helicarrier that reduces the cost. But a multiplayer consideration here is that you can play it out of turn order because you can call an action from somebody else. You can be like, hey, can I use my team building exercise to put something into play on the board? And then that would go ahead and work just fine. And then you can't see the bottom of the card here, but it generates 1 physical resource, a punch resource as I call it. I don't know the actual name. Let's go ahead and discuss the strengths of team building exercise. So for me, how I see it is that it's a really cheap basic support. You look at the other basic supports like Helicarrier or Avengers Mansion, which are 2 cards that make it into almost every single one of my decks. This, on the other end of the spectrum only costs 2, whereas like an Avengers Mansion can cost 4. And if your deck is built in a way to take advantage of team building exercise, I'm not saying it's almost as good as Avengers Mansion, but it gets really close and it's really, it's a lot leaner to get on the board earlier. So maybe the turn you play it, you can also play another card. Whereas when you start off early in a game, Avengers Mansion is usually the only thing you get to play that turn, barring some really high economy heroes. Like I said earlier, another big strength of it is that it can be played out of turn order in multiplayer by calling an action. This is really cool because sometimes you can put like an ally into play from your hand that has a really cool enter the battlefield effect. So maybe the villain has a tough status or something. You're going for a push. You're like, hey, just call an action. I'll bring in this ally that does 1 damage across the board, and we can get rid of that tough, and then your turn can be better. And then also another positive for it is that it has that lower initial cost that I was just talking about earlier on this slide. I got ahead of myself, which can get some, resource flow going, economy going for those really low economy heroes that would need a card like this. Strengths aren't all this card has. It definitely has some weaknesses. I would say personally it's more restrictive than Helicarrier. The thing is you can kind of stack Helicarrier, stack multiple Helicarriers while you're still deciding on the card you're going to play next. This card doesn't give you that flexibility. You have to be in hero mode, and it says you have to play the card as soon as you use this hero action. So there's no you can still use resource generators and a Helicarrier on that card, but when you want to use the team building exercise, you have to play that card. You can't use for example, 2 team building exercises on 1 card. That's something that I didn't understand when I was first playing it. This is a multiplayer only criticism, but it doesn't help the whole board in multiplayer. There's a lot of times in multiplayers where I have an Avengers Mansion or a Helicarrier down and I look at the cards in my hand and I'm like, well, I could be greedy and try and draw into more options, or I could leave this for another player who said their hand wasn't as good, so I'll give them my Helicarrier, my Avengers Mansion, or both, and it kind of helps the whole board be more efficient rather than team building exercise only affects you. You being more efficient is helping everyone, but it's like a different type where sometimes even if you build your deck in a way, you might not hit a team building exercise target, whereas Helicarrier and Avengers Mansions are almost, I would say, 100% of the time online. There's this use it or lose it mentality. That's kind of what I was getting at there. You have to find a target for this card or you're not getting the value out of it. Now, if you've got it like 5 turns in a row and you miss a 6th turn, okay, you've probably got that value, but it still feels bad when it happens. And then, of course, the last criticism is that you must be in hero form to use. Although I hesitate to call this a really strong weakness because most of the time you'll be able to play a card in hero form before you flip down. There's some, rare cases where maybe the card in your hand is like attack event or thwart event and you're stunned or confused, like in that case, you probably wouldn't want to use it. But I feel like there's other factors going wrong that influence that rather than a team building exercise being the problem itself. But we're going to go ahead and get into how do we define where do we put this card into our deck and how good, how many targets or like how good does it have to be where I would personally consider including it. So we're looking at the where to play section right here. And for my first bullet point, I said I think it's subjective player to player where you draw the line where you think the card is good enough to include in a deck. So without going on my own subjective interpretation here just yet, let's see what Fantasy Flight Games thinks is good enough to include copy of team building exercise. So the first pack that came in, like I mentioned all the way at the beginning, was Ant-Man. In Ant-Man's pre-constructed deck, there's 12 targets for team building exercise, and you're going to see there's these numbers in parentheses, the 13. Technically, there's 13 targets in the deck that shares a trait with Ant-Man, but one of those or multiple of those is going to be a zero cost event. I don't necessarily count that because team building exercise doesn't help you pay for that because they're basically free anyways. So for all intents and purposes, only for this slide I'll have the parentheses. If a card that shares their trait but costs zero, that's not going to be included in this analysis going forward because I want the true number of cards the team building exercise actually affects and can give you a discount on. So again, we're going back. Ant-Man, he shipped with 12 targets. I didn't really split how many were in his hero kit specifically or in his pre-con because I didn't think it was applicable just yet. Then we move on to Spider-Ham, which was their next release, and he has 15 targets for team building exercise in his deck, which is a big jump, right? It's 3 above the Ant-Man, and he has 20 that actually share a trait but don't cost anything. It means he has 5 that don't cost anything. And the most recent print of team building exercise that actually has a new art is Iceman, who has 17 targets, and in his deck, it is also just 17 cards that share traits, so he has no zero cost events or anything that share the trait with him. So it is just the pure 17 cards that share his trait that can be reduced and discounted by team building exercise. So this is my own anecdote at the bottom. I think all of these numbers are more than good enough to include 1 copy of team building exercise. I don't know about including 3. You know, every pre-con has to come with play sets of a card because it's a living card game. I don't think a deck like Ant-Man needs 3 copies of team building exercise. That seems like overkill. You know, maybe Spider-Ham and Iceman, you could see there's like an argument for 2. I'm usually almost always only play 1, but there are some cases where if I'm running so many cards, 2 can actually find its way to the table. So now that we have these stats from FFG themselves, let's make some subjective criteria for when I think you should include this card in your decks. So we're going to be using the data here on this page, and you can see on the image on the screen, we have the Iceman version of the team building exercise art. I don't know which one I prefer. This one's really cool, the the X-Men fighting Apocalypse, and the other one is like the Champions with Miles Morales. They're both really cool. But we're going to use the data here real quick. So this is my own subjective metrics for numbers to play the card. This is kind of based on a little bit of the math when you think about how likely you are to get a card in one of your opening hands, and as soon as you have a couple of, supports and upgrades on the table as your deck thins out, you want a good amount of cards in your deck that share the trait to make the card almost always active. You want it basically every turn to get that discount. So let's go ahead. These are my own subjective number of targets versus playability. So for the first one, if you have greater than or equal to 8 targets in your deck, I would say the card is good to play. I think at 8, for me personally, I would include a copy of the card in the deck. I think it's more than good enough. There's going to be a couple of turns where you might whiff because you'll draw multiple, but I think it more than, makes up for it because you'll get a lot of value out of the card over the course of the game. The next number I have is 12 or greater targets in the deck. I think it's great. I think this card at 1, you should definitely be playing. There's almost no reason to. I would assume basically every single hand, even after you go through 1 or 2 deck passes where you put a lot of cards on the table, it only increases that consistency more of getting these cards that match your identity traits, whether it be allies, events, or upgrades, supports, and anything of that nature. At 12, you should have a copy of it. But in case that wasn't convincing enough, we have 15 or more targets, and this is a must play. If you don't include at least 1 copy of the card at 15 or more targets, I think you're actively doing the deck a disservice unless you're not building for power and you're just you don't want to play optimally, you don't like the art on team building exercise or something, that would be the only reason I would say you shouldn't play this card. It is extremely good at 15 plus targets, and it should have a spot in your deck. That is what I have to say about that. We're going to get into a couple more how I go about choosing a hero for team building exercise, but if there's something you want to take from this video, this is the target ranges I would go for including team building exercise in a deck that you have. So we're going to go about, and we're going to start using this criteria. FFG, we use their standards. I made my own subjective criteria. Now we're going to go and talk about picking a hero. So when you're picking a hero to use team building exercise on, I think the first place you should start is a hero that have identity cards that match their trait. Now this is obvious because that's the whole point. Team building exercise, it discounts cards that match your hero's trait. So this should be pretty obvious. But that being said, there are some heroes that have a lot more cards in their specific kit that match their trait than others. Another really big consideration is trying to make it work with heroes with a weaker economy. So even if their own hero kit doesn't have a lot of traits that match, you can bolster the effectiveness of team building exercise with basic cards and especially aspect cards, which we'll see later. You can get to that 8 card benchmark, 12, even 15 card benchmark, even if your hero kit only has 1 or 2 cards that match your printed traits. If we're looking at an FFG example of a hero I would use team building exercise on, it has to be Iceman. So his hero kit alone has 13 targets. 13 out of his 15 cards in his deck are a target for team building exercise, and that's absolutely insane. If anyone who knows has been playing the game for a while, the X-Men, the general X-Men tribe package is also extremely strong with basic characters too. So you can see the first deck I ever made and published in this game, Ready, Set, Freeze on the right. I had 2 copies of team building exercise in it with, I think, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, probably around 20, a bit more than, maybe a little over 20 targets for it. It was really good. Going back, would I keep both? It depends on how I'm feeling, but I think 2 is more than warranted at 20. I mean, that's half your deck at 20 cards that can be targeted by it. I think that's more than worth it. But again, it's more than good enough for 1. So don't let that, the 2 kind of persuade you in any way. But we're going to go ahead and talk about other heroes we should consider as a general guide and baseline for you using team building exercise in decks you want to create. So for the hero choices, we're beginning with honorable mentions. So there's a couple honorable mentions I want to talk about here because I don't think they're necessarily 100% you should include in every deck, but they are interesting to think about. So the first one is Black Panther. He has the average for a card in your hero kit that shares a trait with you is 1, and he has 2, so he's, I guess, double the average there. I think it's Golden City, and then he has another card that's traded Wakanda, I think. Yeah, he has 2 targets in there. The thing about Black Panther, and you're going to see a lot, is that archetypes really can bolster this. So if you have a lot of Avengers allies, events that are traded Avengers, or you're playing leadership or something, that's when you get that team building exercise value really out of a character like Black Panther. Domino is sort of in a similar vein as Black Panther here. She has like 2 posse allies, I think, or something along the lines, or support or something. 2 is more than 1, but it's not like really, her hero kit isn't doing a lot of the heavy lifting. The deck build is going to have to if you want to include the card. Here's some funny ones here. Cable technically has 7 targets, but there's an asterisk there because all of those cards have the psionic trait, and he doesn't gain the psionic trait until he actually thwarts out his player-specific side scheme, Technovirus Purge, which is 5 threat. It comes in with 5 threat, and only he can thwart it. So in my opinion, Def Focus is much better because every single one of those cards also has the superpower trait, so you don't have to worry about team building exercise. But if you wanted to, if you're running an X-Force build, I'm sure he could make it work. It's just his hero kit basically has 0 at that point because he needs the psionic trait. Bishop also has 4. I think they're temporal traded. Thing about them is 2 of them are allies, which is good. 2 of them are upgrades, which are not so good. But also Bishop is a character that is so rich, has so much economy, that I think that's when you have to think about the considerations of team building exercise. Is it kind of redundant to run it in a character like this? For someone like Bishop, I don't think he would ever need to run team building exercise. You can run it if you want even more and more resources, but personally, that's why it has the asterisk. He has so many resources. I don't think he needs it. Also, I want to do an honorable mention for basically every single aerial character in the game. Aerial is one of the most, I think, represented minor traits that isn't an archetype. And when I talk about like an archetype, I'm using it kind of like a Yu-Gi-Oh definition, being like Avengers, Guardians, Web Warriors, X-Men. Outside of those really, really big traits, I think the one right afterwards is probably Aerial. And so many heroes can get it. There's so many supports, there's so many events and allies and things like that that share the Aerial trait, that it is worth the consideration on its own. If a hero has Aerial, I think they can use team building exercise to a good effect. So here's some of the Aerial heroes that I'm not going to mention on the next slide, which are my top picks. Doctor Strange, he gets Aerial. Wasp gets Aerial. Star-Lord gets Aerial. Spectrum specifically, I think, is really good with this. War Machine gets Aerial. I think Vision is also really good. If you think about, he has Aerial synergy. He has Android synergy too, and Avengers synergy. Android is a really small tag, but Vision has it on his hero card, which means he can really use this card effectively. Nova, I think, is really good with it, especially on an Aerial build. Ironheart might be overkill. Storm, I think, is really good with it, and so is Magneto. So those are just some Aerial specific considerations. All of these heroes, if you use the Aerial trait in conjunction with a different sort of archetype or tribe, you will find really good success. So now we're going to move out to the hero choices themselves. So these are my top picks for team building exercise. If you're looking for a place to start, or like to really see how good these heroes can be by utilizing this card, maybe they have lower economy, maybe they just have a ton of magic cards, these are the heroes I should pick from. And I'll preface Ant-Man, Iceman, and Spider-Ham, of course, those are no-brainers. You should play a copy in those decks, of course, because they're the ones that, they're the hero packs that it came in the first place. But these characters are so good and so good with team building exercise, I have to talk about them. So if we look at in their hero kit specifically, we have Thor with 6 targets for team building exercise. A lot of them are Asgard traded, and he has Asgard on his hero side. Valkyrie is in a similar vein, but she only has 4 targets, which is still good. It's way above average in a hero kit, and it's the same thing. They're Asgard traded like Thor. There's also some basic, Asgard cards and Asgard specific allies that can help bolster these decks as well, along with the Avengers trait. Now we get into the really heavy hitters, and the X-Men wave was not playing around. We had Iceman come out with 13 out of his 15 cards being his trait. Phoenix and Psylocke, the Psionic trait goes absolutely insane. These two heroes have 11 out of their 15 cards that can be discounted by team building exercise. I think it is a no-brainer to include a copy, even if you include no other copies of a card that can be discounted by it. It's just that good. You're going to get so much value out of it out of the course of a game. And then, moving on to this sort of X-Force type thing we had going here, Angel comes in with 9 Aerial traded cards. Angel, he gets to reap all the rewards. He has that X-Force tag he can take advantage of. He has all the aerial support events, upgrades, allies, and whatnot he can take advantage of. He is really good with team building exercise, and definitely someone you should consider when building this card. Again, if you had no idea where to start, these are some heroes to get you started. Go ahead, try and put a deck together with them. Try them out. Throw in a copy of team building exercise. You will not be disappointed. Moving on to trait choices. Now, if you didn't see your hero on the really good list or the honorable mentions list or even the Aerial hero list, you'll be like, oh no, I can't play this card in my deck. Don't fret. We're going to talk about trait choices that you can include in a deck to still include team building exercise and use it for different heroes that weren't necessarily listed earlier in this video. So like it says on here, if they're lower on the list, there's a couple ways you could bolster the team building exercise viability, especially if it's a hero with a weaker economy that can get a ton of use out of it. So the biggest one, and the one that you'll most commonly see in my opinion, is allied tribal builds or archetypes, as I said earlier. This being cards that share like the main team on the hero card. And in order of how strong I think they are, I think X-Men is clearly at the top, with Avengers right behind, then Web Warriors, and then at the end being Guardians. So you look at a hero like Gambit, you're like, okay, he wasn't on any of the lists, he doesn't get Aerial. Can I play team building exercise with this hero who I think kind of has a lower economy? The answer is yes. So a way that you could do it, because X-Men specifically has so many basic allies, you could almost play him in any aspect, and as long as you throw in about 8 X-Men allies, he's probably good to go to run a copy of team building exercise, and it will work and work well. On the other, on the extreme end, if you play leadership X-Men specifically, you're going to have so many, targets for your team building exercise. It's going to be so good, but, leadership X-Men is good on basically every single X-Men character. Same thing applies for Avenger, Web Warrior, and Guardian. One thing, like I said, to keep in mind, as you can see on the right side of the screen, it's not just allies. There's also events and supports that can share traits with your identity that can be discounted by team building exercise. Another thing to consider is the psionic cards in general. Although a lot of the psionic heroes you will see were already listed in the honorable mentions and whatnot, some of them were not. But the thing about psionic cards is that it's kind of a rich get richer type of trait choice. Most of the psionic heroes are already extremely good with team building exercise, so adding in more psionic cards just means that there's just going to be even more targets. It's just more to discount, and it's going to get so much more value. And again, as I put in the honorable mentions, aerial builds in general can kind of justify team building exercise by itself. There's a lot of heroes that gain conditional aerial or have it printed on their hero card, and even the conditional aerial is usually good enough alongside other maybe allied tribal cards to be good enough to warrant including the card in the deck. So again, this is not to fret. There are other ways to include team building exercise in a lot of heroes and decks in the game, and I personally think almost any deck can run it with enough targets. So we're going to get to the final thoughts here, and I want to just start off with the first bullet point. Don't feel restricted by this list. It is meant to be a start for you in your deck building journey. If you want a really easy inclusion of team building exercise, go ahead and use that list of like the 5 or 6 strong heroes I included. You will get so much mileage out of it. It will be so good. Trust me, you won't regret it. That being said, once you've had your fill with those heroes, try and experiment. Make some like wacky builds with like, I don't know, Iceman getting aerial for half a second with his ice slide. Try and make an aerial team building build, see how that works out. Again, Iceman is really good with team building in general, so I should have picked a different hero. Maybe a War Machine aerial build. Tell me how that goes and if it works out well for you. Like I said in the slide before, if the hero doesn't seem like a good fit, you need to find and search out those unique combos, and aerial plus tribal is one of those that can work really well and hit those subjective numbers where I think team building exercise can really shine in a deck. And another disclaimer that I added at the end of the last section was it's not only ally cards, so you really should look through your entire collection, through every different basic, upgrade, support, event, ally. Look through the aspect, upgrade, support, event, allies for the traits that match your hero or traits that you get conditionally throughout the course of a game. Trust me, there are so many more targets for this card than just allies. A lot of people kind of shoehorn themselves into thinking, oh, I just add 8 allies in and I put a team building exercise that matches my hero. Boom. Again, that works just well, fine and good, but I think you'll have some opportunities to find new and exciting deck building opportunities if you expand your, horizon a little bit outside of just adding in 8 allies, trying to incorporate some supports, upgrades, events, and things like that. Before the end of this video, I want to go ahead and search and see how this subjective list holds up against all the decks submitted on MarvelCDB. So we're going to go ahead and meet you guys there. Okay, so here we are on MarvelCDB. If you guys haven't seen this resource before, it's super good for, getting pre-built, usually tried and tested decks to help you get into some games faster, have a lot of fun and whatnot. Now, if you're looking for specific cards that include team building exercise, I'm going to show you how to do that. So we're going to go to deck list right here. So we're going to go ahead and click that. And now we're going to do an advanced search. And we're just going to search team building exercise here. And we're going to put all 3 copies of it. Usually, MarvelCDB will substitute a team building exercise from other sets, based on your card pool. But we're just going to put them all in here. Boom. So we have all of this here. This is what we're looking for, and let's say we're just going to click search and see if our picks kind of stand up here to the scrutiny of decks submitted. So let's look at this. We're looking at all the team building exercise decks submitted. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 5 out of the first 6 ones are heroes that I strongly recommended and were basically auto includes for team building exercise. You can see that the criteria holds up here. We have Jubilee and Cyclops. So these is the example of the X-Men leadership tribe being so strong that you can just kind of include it. So if we're looking here, we have a team build exercise. This has the X-Men trait. This one has the extra trait, so that's already 2. Then we have 3, 4, 5. Sorry, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So it already hits that 9. It already hits that 9 card threshold for including a top of team building exercise, and they went ahead and did it. So this is one of those things where you don't have to be super hard and fast about the numbers here. It kind of lines up over time, and you get this intrinsic feeling of, wow, team building would be really good in this deck. Again, we have things here like, Spider-Man Miles Morales wasn't even considered here as a part of a card that can include team building exercise. There's cards in there that have it included. So there's just so many things you can think about. And I guess one consideration is the shield trait, because I assume even though Miles Morales doesn't have it, the shield trait is probably going to get a big boost for team building exercise. So I'm assuming Nick Fury and Maria Hill will both be very good for it in the future. We're just going through a couple more pages. Let's go to the second page. You see Cyclops, Iceman, Storm, Iceman, Cyclops, Bishop, even though I said it wasn't, a super big thing, Psylocke, Cable has it. So there you go. Some person wasn't running Death Focus, like, nope, I'm going to make team building work. But it is X-Men leadership. So, we're looking here. There's a couple of, so we have a couple of hits here for X-Force. We have the team building exercise. So, again, there's so many different decks you can do. And we have my good friend Daring Lime here, who, even though, like I said, he was an honorable mention, it's still right here, team building exercise. And I don't know why he included it, because he has 10 allies that share hitting that 8 or above threshold to include a copy. Like I said, even if you're looking for a specific hero with it, let's say I just want to go crazy. I want to do Groot with team building exercise. Let's see if they can help me out. Boom, we already have right here that same sort of justice build, team building exercise. We have 8 Guardian allies. There's just so much things. If you're looking for inspiration on your favorite hero, you can just throw another one here. I don't know. Let's do like a Ironheart with team building exercise. There's just so many things you can take inspiration from, and a lot of it's going to be leadership if they don't share a lot of their traits intrinsically, but it doesn't have to be. That's something for you to have fun, explore for yourselves, and whatnot. So once again, thank you guys all for watching this deep dive into team building exercise, sort of the considerations for using the card, how to put it more effectively into your decks, and kind of, taking a deeper dive in this maybe overlooked card in the current state of the game. Let me know if you guys got anything from this, and what are some of the favorite heroes you find yourself using team building exercise in throughout the many years of playing this game, or if you just started recently, sort of like I have. What have you had the most fun with recently using this card? Thanks so much for watching. I will see you guys in the next one. Stay tuned for a ton more content coming in the new year. I appreciate the support so much. Leave a like and subscribe if you haven't already. I'll see you guys in the next one. Goodbye.